Welcome back to Workflows Learning Series. My name is Mike Cohane. We're picking up our lessons here. We'll be studying tables and loops in workflow automation inside the Meraki dashboard in this lesson. So we'll be taking JSON data that we're getting back from our web service, which we learned how to build in our previous episodes, and we'll be doing some complex parsing on it to pull data out, and then using loops to iterate over that data to find the data we're looking for. So let's get started and take a look at how all this is done. As previous, we will take our lesson that we worked on earlier and we'll build upon that. So we're going to duplicate the JSON placeholder web service ++ in order to use it for this lesson and not lose our previous work. So here's our copy. We're going to click on that, view that workflow. I'm going to change the name. So in this one, we'll say find it, because in this lesson, we're going to take our JSON web service, we're going to make a request, we're going to get data back, but we're going to query it only for the specific data we want. Again, different ways of doing this. We could actually modify the HTTP request to do some of these things, but what we're trying to do is learn the tools in automation so we can use that in more complex lessons in the future. So the last place we left off, we had branched off, depending on the type of request we were doing, we were handling users requests and post requests. So what I'd like to do is go into this users branch and the post branch and pull out more specific information related to that. We used a JSON path query to pull information before. If we click on that as an example, we can see that we used the body of the HTTP request response, queried out the name, and we could store that. But what I'd like to do is be able to pull out more than one field. And again, there'll be different ways of doing that, all of which are pretty straightforward. But I'd like to show you how we can use tables. Tables allow us to pull information out, store it relative to each other, and then iterate over it in a very easy way. So what do I mean by that? Let's leave our JSON path query there. Let's close this up, and let's go down and look at the table activity. This is an adapter that is coming with workflow automation. And what I want to do is I want to be able to create a table from the JSON we got back from our web service. I'm going to copy that over. So instead of using a JSON path query, I'm going to pass in the path of $, which is all the information. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to pull out information from that table. I'd like it to pull out the name, and I'd like it to pull out the email from the JSON response and store that in a table. So the source that we'll be acting on, if I click on the reference, would be the HTTP request body. So we'll validate that. Looks good. Let's just stop there and run that, and let's see if that works. We're going to use the users. That's what we're going to request for users. So we'll drop down into this conditional. We're doing our JSON path query, which just pulls out the name. Now let's take a look at what we got back from the read table from JSON. You can already tell that it's broken it up and created a new response body, which is a JSON association with the name and the email fields we wanted. And if we look down further, we'll see an actual table that has been generated. And we'll be able to act on this table and iterate over it. So what could we do with something like that? Well, let's say we wanted to find this name right here. And if we can find that name, we want the email associated with that. So let's modify this and let's add two variables. We're going to add an input variable that is going to be a string, and we're going to ask for a matching field. And what that says is basically, given the inputted value, find corresponding data. Now this will be different whether I'm doing users or posts or whatever. So we're trying to make this generic so we can reuse it. That's going to be an input variable, and it will be required for the workflow to run, and this is just going to be text. Okay, And I'm going to put in a default value. I'm going to put that in as the default value so we don't have to keep saving it. All right. Now, what can we do with that? We're in here. We have a table. I'd like to iterate, loop over this table and find that particular value that the user has requested. So what would something like that look like? Let's go back up into the logic and let's look at the loops. We have two types, a while loop and a for each loop. Let's use the for each loop. We're going to drop that in here. Now, what I want to say is for each item in this table, I want to do something. So how would I do that? I've got this highlighted. I'm going to present as the source array the table. And I could find that easily in workflows by clicking on the reference. There's my activity. We were parsing based on operation type. We were in the users branch. It already knows that. And we were reading a table from JSON. And that gave us that array we saw. So I'm going to save that. That is our source. Okay. Now, that means we will iterate over that. We could actually go and run that, I believe. Let's see. Let's run that. We're not going to do anything, but we're going to iterate over that. Let's see what something like that looks like. We're going to drop down here into the users branch, and we're going to do a loop. And remember, there were 10 entries, and we looped 10 times. We could actually look at each one of these. So good, our loop is working. Now, what could we do with that? Well, I'd like to find in that loop a matching entry for the user that we passed in and pull out the email. And we already know all the tools to do that. We have a loop that can spin around. We just need to do a conditional to find it. So in our logic, we'll come up here and we'll do a conditional. We'll drop that in. We only need one conditional, so let's delete this. And let's name this conditional find a match for user and email. Okay? So that's kind of descriptive. The actual conditional will be, we want to check the current entry, the current table entry we're looping over, and see if that name equals the name we're looking for. So we're going to say, in our activities, which is parse based on operation type, we're in the user branch, we're in a loop. You can see it's all set for us. We're going to look at the name. Out of the items, the name. Those are the two things we pulled out of the table. And we're going to see if that equals the inputted value, workflow input, matching field. So the user in this case is going to put a matching field in for the name. Generic, so we can reuse it for things like posts. All right, if they're equal, we're going to drop into this conditional branch. Now, what we want to do in that conditional branch is we want to copy information into a variable. So we need to create a new output variable. I clicked on the canvas, add a variable. It's going to be a string, and it's going to be an output variable, so I like to use the word output. And I'm going to call that matching result. Again, generic, so I can use it for any of these operations. That's going to be an output variable, and it's going to be a text box. Now, in our user's case, we're going to store the email there. In the posts, I'll probably store a title or something like that in there. So I have a variable called output matching result. So in here now, I want to do a set operation. I want to set a variable with the value that we are in the current iteration of this table. We found a match for the user input, and I want to store the email equivalent. So under activities, I want to do a set variable, and I'm doing a search this time to show you that you don't have to remember where everything is. Set variable. Now, what do I want to set? I want to set the variable workflow output matching result. And what do I want to put in there? From my activity, we're in the parser user branch, we're reading table, we're in the for loop, excuse me, and we have a source array of items, the email and the name that we stored. I want the email that matches this iteration of the table that we are on, and I want to store that in there. Let's validate that and run it, and then we'll check where we are. So we're going to run against our users. Leon Graham is the person we're trying to match on. We want their email. So we'll let that run. And it is complete. Now, we have 10 iterations. Just so happens they're the first iteration. So we came in here and matched and set the variable. If we looked at the second iteration, we did not drop in there because if we look on the right side, for each, right now we're on Shannon at Melissa TV for Irvin Howell. That's not a match. But if we looked at iteration 1, there's Leanne Graham, and their email is sincere@april.biz. That's kind of odd, but whatever. That's what it is. And you can see that for every entry. So you could do quite a bit of debugging here that you could see what matches and what doesn't. I can look at the results of every one of those loop iterations and see what happened on that. And again, you'll see that we only set the variable on the first case where we got a match. If I click on my canvas and look at my variables, there in my output matching result, there is my email. So let's step back a little bit and look at what we've done here. We have created a web service to call out and do different operations. When that operation is the users, I'm going to create a table of the email addresses and the names. And then I'm going to loop over those emails and names, and I'm going to look for a match for only the information I care about, and I'm going to return that information. So very powerful and actually very easy to make. So we've nested this and made this quite deep, but it's very easy to do, and that's why I'm using this as an example. You're probably not going to have to get any more complicated in anything you do than this, and you can see how easy this is. Now, what if I want to extend that? So I want to do the same thing over here for my posts. I want to pull data out of that. Well, I don't want to repeat all of this, so I'm going to duplicate some of it. I'm going to duplicate my read table. So I'll duplicate and I'll copy that over. I'm going to drag that over. But I'll change the data. So here now, I don't want the name and email. I want the, if you remember, I want the ID of the posts and I want the title. All right. Okay, good. So I'll get that. And then I want to duplicate the whole for loop. So let's duplicate that and drag that over. All right. Now we're doing a for loop. Now notice over here, I duplicated and moved it into a different branch of logic. So the source array was pointing at this table, but that doesn't make sense in this path. So the reference is not found, which makes sense. Let's delete that. What source do I actually want? When I click on the reference, you're going to see how this resolves it pretty quickly for me. I'm in parse based on operations, but I'm in the post branch. It knows that and tells me. Then I want the read table from JSON, and I want that table as an array. I'm going to save that. Okay. Then I'm going to come down to my conditional, and I'm going to find a match for, I'm going to change this name, for ID and title. And I'm going to do a conditional check. Now again here we have references that don't make sense because we're in a different line of logic. So let's find the fields in our logic. So what we want is from our activities, from our parsing on the post branch, we want to come down, we're in a for loop, and we want to look at the array from that for loop. There's two items in it, the ID and the title. I want to check the ID, and I want to compare that to see if it's equal to the workflow input matching field we'll pass in. That'll be our ID, and we want to find the title. So let's validate that. Okay, when we validated that, we get an invalid in the set variables, which makes sense. If we look at set variables, the values that were in there on this path don't make sense on our current path because they had to do with the user's path. So we're going to update. What variable do we want to update? We want to update our output variable, matching result. And what value do we want to put in there? We want to put in the current matchings ID's title. So we're coming back from the post, we've looped through in our loop, and our current entry, give me the title that matches the ID we passed in. So out of our activities, in the post branch, in our loop, in our source array for our loop, I want the title. Let's put that in there and save it. Let's validate again. Okay, this time we look good. And let's go ahead and run that. So what we're going to ask for, we're doing a post. Give me back the post from our web service. I want the 15th post. I want to get back the title of that. So let's run that. We're coming down. The HTTP request is complete. We've got our table. We've looped through it. Now you can see there's a lot of entries in here. I believe there's 100 posts that it gives back. Let's let that complete. 1 out of 99. Yeah, so there's roughly 100 entries in there. 1 out of 100. Now you can see here that the set is not happening on the first one because that doesn't give us a match. Let's do the conditional branch. The 1 does not equal 15. So if we go up here to 15, whoops, my bad. We see we are setting a variable because in this conditional branch, 15 equals 15. And what are we setting? We're setting that output variable that we wanted to do, which was the new value of the title, which is right here. So we're putting that at a matching result. If we go look at our variables, matching field, not matching field, output matching result, there is the title of our post for item 15. All right, let's pause for a moment and talk about what we've done. We now have a workflow that makes a web service. Let's go back to the workflow. We now have a workflow that makes a web service request, validates to make sure it was a valid operation succeeding. We're going through it based on whether that was a user's operation or a post operation. We're pulling information relevant for each one of those operations into tables. We're looping over those tables, and we're doing a conditional to look for the information the user wants, and we're giving it back. Before we call this a wrap, I'd like to do one more thing. A lot of you would probably want an easy way to manipulate JSON. So when we did our HTTP request body we got back, say for users, we got that giant JSON body, and we wanted to reduce it. The JSON path query can reduce by field, but you get distinct data. So I get a new array of names, I get a new array of emails. But really what I would like is a new JSON with just the fields I want in it. And we can overload how we use tables, which is a great tool for iterating over, to do exactly that. When we read from a table, we take the information that we're parsing on and we store it in a JSON. Now we use it as a table, but it's stored as a JSON. How could I save that value so that I could then give that back to the user for some other operation? Let's go ahead and create a new variable, a new output variable. It's going to be a string, and what I want is an output variable with the filtered JSON in it. That's going to be it's going to be an output variable of type JSON. And what I want to do is I want to do a set variable here after I read from the table so that somebody can access this later for whatever purpose. And this is a common thing people do with JSON. So we're going to add the variable to update is our output variable, output filter JSON, and the value is the output array of our table. So in the users, if we come down here to read table from JSON, here's our output array. We're going to save that. Let's validate it and run. Be the same data values. What we should see is the filtered JSON is stored. So there's our variable. If we look at our output, our output variables, here's our filtered JSON. And you can see we have a new JSON with just the relevant pairs in them. So I've taken that complex JSON structure from the web request and I've filtered it down. This is something you'll probably do again and again and again. This is a very handy way of doing it. And the beauty of this is you can then iterate over the data very easily in your loops. So it creates a very powerful tool for you for manipulating data and doing data transformation. So I think at this point we've done more than enough to hurt your brain a little bit, but hopefully this all makes sense. Try it yourself. Please reach out to us. We'd help you with any questions that you may have. We can talk about these topics in more detail, and we'll be making more videos in our series that begin to act on our domain activities, our adapters related to specific domains like Meraki, Catalyst Center, ICE, and how we can use them to create automations. And when we do that, we'll come back to these concepts we learned right here in order to make those much more powerful. Okay, I'll see you in the next lesson. Thank you very much.